Hello, everyone. My name is Johan Draaisma. I am the Access Server Product Manager from OpenVPN here, and me and Greg Keller from JumpCloud will be talking about how you can leverage JumpCloud and OpenVPN together to create a secure VPN solution.
Awesome, Johan. Good to be with you today. Folks, this is Greg Keller. I'm JumpCloud's Chief Strategy Officer. Prior to that, I was the chief nerd of the product who launched this thing about 5 years ago. So we're absolutely excited to be working with OpenVPN. As you'll see, this was really a very natural confluence of technologies that have come together less in a forced or contrived way. Frankly, our customers showed us how they're using our technologies together every day. And I think by the end of this presentation, which will conclude with a live fire demo, you'll get a visual walkaway of how all these parts are very easily glued together. So Johan, I'm gonna have you mute out. I'm gonna drive through some agenda. In just a few minutes, we are going to bring Johan back for a deep dive into OpenVPN Access Server, and he's gonna take the reins here in just a second. So what are we going to talk about today? The folks we have on the line are probably just like Johan, just like me. We're technologists. We kind of live this stuff. And we're going to go through some basics, though, stuff that we'll actually get through pretty quickly because we think you already have that blocking and tackling understood in your organizations. By that, I mean understanding general VPN use cases, how, when, and where you deploy the need for a virtual private network. The same thing for understanding directories. So why does a company actually institute some type of centralized identity management? We'll go through a few of those reasons and frankly, some of the pitfalls of when you don't have centralized identity management. We're going to pass the reins over to Johan, and he's going to dive through OpenVPN Access Server and then pass back to me, wherein I will take you through our product, the Directory as a Service, and showing how directories can actually exist very, very effectively up in the cloud and what all that means. Finally, we're going to go through a technical overview of the OpenVPN and JumpCloud integration. What that really means is we're going to do some boxes and lines drawings. We're going to show you the integration between a couple of different protocol endpoints, LDAP and Radius in particular. And then we're going to show you how this thing actually works. No, as we like to say, we don't, you're going to watch PowerPoint here for a little bit, but as technologists, we love showing off the bits. So we're going to be doing this by using the real software, not walking you through some PowerPoint stuff. And then time permitting, we will be jumping into a Q&A session. If you have questions, we ask you to use the question and answer forum. It's all part of the GoToWebinar platform that you're now viewing this webinar through. There's a little portal, a messaging system where you can post your questions. On staff, we have both Radius and LDAP experts in the room, folks that know both and have actually installed the OpenVPN Access Server stack. Obviously, are JumpCloud experts, but most profoundly are protocol experts. So if you have questions, fire them off. And if we have time at the very end, we'll do a live fire Q&A and maybe address some of them between Johan and I. So let's kick this thing off. So let's start with the basics of VPN, understanding the general use cases for it. But even before I begin this, I kind of want to just make a general statement. The interesting part about how this webinar came together was actually driven by data. And that was data that JumpCloud surveyed its customer base, now global, and very deep IT expertise, who choose best of breed where they can. And we asked all kinds of questions that related to what kind of operating systems are in use, what cloud infrastructure is being used. Granted, we have a lot of telemetry and visibility on our own data platform side, but we asked directly, what are you either using now for various technologies, or what do you propose to use? And when the question came to virtual private networks, overwhelmingly, OpenVPN is the weapon of choice of our customer base. And we found that very, very interesting. So we know the OpenVPN folks. We said, do you want to tell the story together? And it was an overwhelming yes, let's get out there. And thus you're going to sort of see this unfold. But now back to understanding the general use cases for VPN. Let's kind of walk through this quickly, and Johan and I can kind of banter a little bit where needed. When you look at the first use case, this is very, very typical. It's the remote access case. It's where the employee actually has some mobility. They may be in a remote home office, or frankly have to travel, and they are typically required to stay tethered in some way through a secure tunnel to the resources that matter, the corporate sort of secure resources. They could be files, data, information, applications, etc. Very often you see this in the world of Microsoft, especially those that are using Windows domain join machines. And there's a predication of VPN just to, frankly, stay connected to the mothership. The cool part with JumpCloud is you don't necessarily need VPN in that use case. VPN is still absolutely critical. We use OpenVPN here to get access to our secure infrastructure, primarily cloud-based infrastructure, in order to, of course, have a private secure tunnel between our, brick and mortar locations. But this is what you often see. It's typically a remote singleton worker or a team of workers that actually have to pop through a tunnel in order to, get secure access to the stuff that they need. Now, when you move,
and
Johan.
the interesting is also that you see OpenVPN being deployed in all sizes, like even just someone at home that runs a server and is like, I'd like to be able to access my computer, from work or whatever, and all the way up to data centers where they connect thousands of computers through one or multiple VPN links. It's quite interesting how flexible it is in that regard.
Absolutely. And even, you bring up the home network kind of thing. I use it at home. My teenage sons know exactly what a VPN is now, which is
That's
interesting.
great.
It is. It's in this day and age of we just don't know who is looking at our packets and easily cracking them open and, learning more about us. I don't feel very good in my stomach with that. So that's why we use it at home. But clearly
Yeah.
that is trickle down technology from, frankly, strong security minded industry needing the ability to kind of just maintain secure access. Let's move into the next general use case, clearly site to site. JumpCloud is a company now that has grown fairly substantially in terms of the number of employees. We have now multiple offices. We're moving global, and we are this picture right now. We are the company that actually has to tunnel in between ourselves to just maintain that secure, tight connection. Frankly, as we like to say, even in a domainless world where everything is virtual and in the cloud, VPNs are the things that sort of establish that virtualized network. And we depend upon this every day between us. And most profoundly, if you just take the use case away of two brick and mortar establishments, we are a fairly substantial customer of Amazon around the globe. We depend upon VPN in order to maintain a tight access to our cloud infrastructure. Obviously, beyond that, using strong SSH and other mechanisms, including multi-factor. But the tunneling is the general first tube that we sort of teleport all of our information through.
Yeah, I have to say that we see this happen a lot, especially in the last 5 years or so, especially with these cloud platforms like Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and of course Amazon AWS. A lot of people are building a lot of great solutions in Amazon, but they run into the problem of having to open it up to the internet and then having to separately secure each application that they open up to the internet, like add SSL protection or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing is if you just install a VPN server, you can just keep everything private and off the internet and still access it securely. So yeah, it's a great
Exactly
solution.
right. We'll move in now to basically an instantiation of the prior, which is, when you're really starting to move into more complex subnet structures, basically. So in this particular use case, again, JumpCloud, it's funny, I built these slides. In fact, what you're looking at, this is a good example of the commingling of our worlds, OpenVPN and JumpCloud. These are actually all OpenVPN kind of images that you're seeing, but this is truly like even a deeper look at what our infrastructure here looks like, especially with respect to subnets and using virtual LANs in order to route the traffic, or better use cases to prevent others from accessing that. This is really what we look like.
Looks complex.
Yeah, it is, as we are scaling, you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Now, to our point earlier, I think, Johan, this is actually really a more profound example of the home internet kind of thing. This use case is why our family uses this, mainly, from our, in my case, my son's mobile devices through, our iMacs and Windows machines that are floating around our house. We just pass everything through our particular instance of OpenVPN, the free version, and in this case, it just masks everything. We don't necessarily, we're protecting, really the outbound traffic from understanding really where it's being served from.
Yeah, that's a good use case, but also a lot of the times you're on public internet places, even like open Wi-Fi and stuff like that. If you send traffic over that, it could be intercepted by someone else on the same network. There could be some bad actor there. The great thing is that if you just tunnel your traffic through the VPN connection to your own home server, well, you trust your home server and you trust your internet connection at home. So yeah, it's a good way to secure that traffic from eavesdroppers.
That's exactly right. So we'll move in now. Think of this as toggling from the general use cases of how, when, and where a VPN client or a VPN infrastructure is important. Let's kind of do the analog here about directories. And this will be very quick. I am confident everybody on this call that has worked in IT, for a minimum of 12 months, will start to really understand viscerally the concept of centralized identity. So we'll get through this quickly and get to the real meat of the presentation. When we look at our problem space, here we are as a company, this is JumpCloud I'm speaking about, and we serve our customers by centralizing identity. It is amazing to us the types of questions that come in, and when we get to really see infrastructure, especially of fast scaling companies, 200, 300, 400, 500 employees, that don't necessarily have some sort of centralized mechanism for binding. Very often, we see companies that are leveraging Google. It has an amazing directory of users, but it is not sort of this universal foundational directory that covers all the things that an employee is going to generally or be required to access, starting with their MacBook or Windows machine to even the wireless networks when they walk into an office, all those things, right? And what we generally see is the propagation of independent passwords, very often very weak passwords, non-NIST compliant, in the new day and age of long, very complex or phrase-based passwords. Many of these systems just, we all know users are lazy. They do not want to comply. So they will, like water running downhill, they'll choose the easiest path, which is some variant of a simple password, like password 123 or John Doe 123 or 123 John Doe. They're all different, but they're all poppable, generally speaking. That, and the number one violation we see is the shared SSID and password 99.9% of the time written on a whiteboard, and this is the network of the employees. Everyone is sharing the same thing, and as you'll see, the complexity of how all this goes sideways when you offboard an employee.
Yeah, one of the major challenges, of course, in IT is that, there are a lot of different solutions available. You have some problem that you want to solve. You look online, you find a solution. It's like, hey, we can use that, but then you have to log into it, and
That's
then
right.
you have to set up a new set of credentials for a user to use. So eventually, ends up with like 20 credentials just to do his daily job. So
That's
that's
exactly right.
not ideal. Yeah.
It's not, and we're seeing, obviously the moves for, obviously FIDO2, WebAuthn, which in effect is all passwordless authentication. These are phenomenal technologies moving fast to uh, sort of prevent this awkwardness, so to speak, but still they're abstractions. Underneath these various resources are authentication mechanisms, and very often have traditional mechanisms. Even if they're hashed and salted, there will be a credential set that is involved underneath the covers. The badness happens like this, as you know, where John Doe is asked to leave the company. You have these independent passwords, and the machine isn't governed, right? There is no direct tethering or binding to some sort of authoritative source, so there's no way to control that person if they make off with the hardware. More sophisticated attacks will often occur by the network exposure, where there's been no change, especially if you're dealing with a former employee that had escalated privileges. They will know how to traverse networks. They just need their original set of creds or an original set of creds that they once had access with. So it's all very dangerous, especially, again, using anything shared is not good. When you look at directories, this is really where you start to get more sophisticated. It's why you implement them, which is to centralize a version of the identity. But it really breaks down to two general things. It is, number one, the authn. It's the authentication practice. It's centralizing and making a set of credentials that are really hard and that comply with some sort of NIST standard, which JumpCloud does, obviously. The other half of this transaction, though, is auth-z. It's the authorization part. What this graphic is showing you in this simple model is that our fictitious employee, this guy John Doe, is a member of the engineering group. That is the authorization group. So within this particular directory, this particular group John Doe has access to, may provide network access, it may provide VPN access, but it's not giving him access to other things he shouldn't access, like various servers or various on-prem or SaaS-based applications, right? So it is very important to understand that, directories in and of themselves just aren't technologies that necessarily, have you bang against them for password authentication. It's all about the authorization aspect. And I bring this up because, as you'll see when we dive into the demo, this is really the juice of, managing, let's say, OpenVPN credential and authentication against JumpCloud. So you have some mechanism of authorization, group-based authorization. We're going to, get very specific there in just a few minutes. With that, what I want to do now is we're going to pass the presentation technology, so to speak, over to Johan, and he is going to drive us through the depths of the Access Server from OpenVPN. Again, it's what we're going to be demonstrating here in a few minutes. Johan is the product manager, so he is the authority behind this technology, and he's going to drive us. Johan, take it away.
Hi. All right. Great, Greg. So, is everyone seeing the presentation all right? Let's see. All right, great. So in this part of the presentation, I just kind of want to start out by giving everyone here a fast introduction of what OpenVPN is. Since people probably already have a fair idea of what VPN is, I'll try to keep it short and simple. My goal here is just to give you a very basic understanding of what OpenVPN is and what it can do for you. Now, you've seen some use cases already, and we'll go into more of the details of our commercial solution called OpenVPN Access Server in a little bit. And my friends from JumpCloud, of course, even have a live demo later on, which will be very useful to you to figure out, how it really works. So let's start about the OpenVPN project itself. It was actually originally started by one man called James Johan and released initially somewhere in May of 2001. So it's about 18 years old, so a fairly, adult product. It has a lot of development and a lot of bugs and fixes in them as well over the 18 years that it's been around. Over time, as the project gained traction and more developers joined to assist in improving it and adding more functionality, eventually a group of OpenVPN core developers emerged and became the main caretakers. And James Yonan, of course, still remains involved in that project. The goal of this piece of software was to make it possible to easily connect two or more computers together to allow them to communicate with each other in a private network. Now, already VPN solutions existed back then, like PPTP and even IPsec and all that stuff. But another goal of this project was to have it work without requiring special protocols like GRE. So you can run it over a standard UDP or TCP connection without having to open a whole bunch of ports. In theory, even one port is enough just to make this work. It could be TCP or UDP, but keep it simple, basically. And communication between computers in this virtual private network would be secure because any traffic sent through this VPN tunnel to the private network would be encrypted so that programs or people trying to eavesdrop on that private network traffic would not be able to make sense of the information they try to capture. So even if you have, for example, a server in the office with your work documents on it, and you're using the public internet to connect your laptop to that server, then it would be safe to do so if you use OpenVPN to secure that traffic. People on the public internet would not be able to eavesdrop on this information. So documents that you're sending and receiving over this connection remain safe from eavesdropping or people trying to, bad actors, man in the middle attacks, that sort of stuff. Well, I think many people here probably already understand that this is pretty much the definition of the term VPN or virtual private network. It's a private network that nobody can break into, and it's virtual because there are no real physical cables or physical devices that are making this secure connection possible. It's all being handled in software. You do, of course, need a working and physically existing internet connection. But on top of that, you can run the VPN software and create an entirely virtual private network. You can install a piece of software on a server that handles the incoming VPN connections like OpenVPN Access Server, and you install a VPN client on the client device like OpenVPN Connect client for Windows and Mac, and you connect them together and there you have it. You've got a working VPN solution. And the server and the client can now communicate securely with each other. So as a company, we are still dedicated to keeping the open source project safe and reliable to use, meaning we do our own audits on it. But since the project is also open source, it means literally anyone can download the source code of OpenVPN and examine it for any bugs or backdoors or flaws, etc. So the open source project, we try to keep independent. There's a core group of developers that have control over what goes into the project, and they check each other's work and any contributions that are made to the project as well. It also remains transparent in its goals and process, basically to provide a secure and flexible VPN solution. Aside from that, with 18 years of development in this project and with multiple third-party audits, most recently and positively, with nothing of note to report in terms of vulnerabilities by the Ostiv project and Quarks Lab, we're confident that this project is really an excellent basis for a great VPN solution. And so it has been for the past, 10 years or so that I've been working with the company. So it's a good solution, I'd say. So the open source OpenVPN project is great, but the problem is that companies want something to fall back on when there's a problem. An open source community is generally a best effort type of support by volunteers. because, it's just an open source project, and usually it's run by programmers, that have a passion for this project, and they have free time and they devote it to this. But customers want to be able to go to a company and say, listen, I purchased this piece of software from you, and I'm having trouble getting it integrated with my systems, and I need your help now. And that is one of the main reasons why the OpenVPN company was started by Francis Dina and James Johan to address these needs. Over the years, we've become very successful in this with the product called OpenVPN Access Server, and its accompanying OpenVPN Connect client software. At the heart, they're based on the open source OpenVPN project. We provide expert support for this software so that even complex situations can be set up and configured to work. The Access Server also extends the functionality significantly to make it easier to implement and use the OpenVPN solution. One of the examples of that is that if you take, for example, the open source OpenVPN project, it's basically a command line driven tool, and you need to know all the details of how to configure it in order to effectively use it. So it becomes pretty difficult to use it, if you just take it as is in an open source project. OpenVPN Access Server adds, for example, a web-based interface that makes it easier to work with, on top of a lot of other things to make things a lot easier to deploy the solution to clients as well. So yeah, we've become quite successful in this. And on top of that, we still work closely together with the OpenVPN core developers to ensure that any security issues are fixed as soon as possible, and that they have the necessary resources to do their job. And of course, we ourselves contribute to the project heavily. Anytime we think of something new that we really think makes sense for everyone to have in this project, we add it to Access Server, but then it also gets added to the OpenVPN project as well, so other people can use it if they want to. So OpenVPN Access Server then is a software product that you can use to connect computers and networks together. As my friends from JumpCloud have explained, this can be useful, for example, to allow people to work from home, so they still have access to all the files and programs they need to do their job. That's one aspect of it. It's easy and flexible to deploy. The ease of implementation, I think, is something that needs some explanation. As I said, the open source project is kind of like just the engine. It does the heavy lifting of creating the VPN tunnel and encrypting data, decrypting data, and making all the communication possible. But it can be challenging to configure, because when you look at the documentation for the project, you immediately encounter deeply technical instructions on how to write configuration files in text format, how to create certificates, how to distribute them. It can get pretty hairy. The open source community and documentation give you a lot to read, but there's no way to really quickly start with the OpenVPN open source project to set up a server and get your computer connected to it. There's also the pitfall where if you don't know enough about it, you could still get a connection going, but it might not be secured in the best possible way. For example, if you don't know that TLS authentication is a method like a software firewall, an HMAC firewall that you can enable on OpenVPN, but you don't enable it because you don't know how to do it or you haven't read about it, then your security is not optimal. So that's one of the things where OpenVPN Access Server, tries to solve that by offering a number of easily deployable images that are already pre-configured with secure settings. We have images available for ESXi, Hyper-V, Amazon AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, even DigitalOcean now. We even have a contributor on Docker Hub that creates a Docker image that has Access Server in it. And we're considering launching our own official image on Docker Hub eventually, so that we can also cover that. Our default settings that we use for Access Server are always changing over time as different things change. Like, for example, Years ago, 1024-bit certificates were eventually deprecated. So we moved to 2048 bits. And, every time something like that changes, we change our default settings as well. So if you upgrade your server, we try to give you the best security possible. Now, the whole point of this presentation, of course, is to talk about the capability of Access Server to authenticate against a common source of credentials using a protocol like LDAP or Radius. Access Server is able to connect to JumpCloud secure LDAP server or Radius server, and you can have one single set of credentials for multiple services, thereby lowering the burden on your users instead of having to give them yet another set of credentials to deal with. For example, I can just imagine that people are thinking like, I need a secure way to access my cloud environment, but then when I add this solution, this access server to my cloud environment, people are going to have to, get new credentials and work with that, and it creates an additional burden. And JumpCloud, OpenVPN, centralized credential management tries to resolve that, so you don't get yet another set of credentials. Another great thing about Access Server, it makes it easy to do client deployments, especially on Windows and Macintosh, probably the main operating systems that people will be using. The great thing is that the web interface of the Access Server contains a bundled copy of our Connect client software that you can install. So basically, you go to a Windows or Mac computer, you go to the web interface of the Access Server, you provide your credentials, and the required software is being offered to you directly, and you install it and you connect, and you're done. In the next few slides, I'll show a picture of what that looks like, and later on, we'll have a live demo done by JumpCloud, so you can actually see, how that whole process works. And of course, support is an important item, and that's why we have a team of support personnel in the USA and in Europe to cover most time zones and provide 24/7 support. So that if you do have a problem or a question, you can come to us and we can help you out. With Access Server installed on a server, you can access its admin web interface. It gets installed by default, and you can see the status overview right when you log in. This is the first thing you see when you log on to the admin web interface. It shows some basic information about what kind of authentication system is being used right now, how many devices are currently online and connected to this server, how many connections you're allowed to make to this server in total, among other information. If you run the Access Server entirely self-contained, meaning that you don't choose to use JumpCloud, but you choose to just have the user accounts and passwords stored in the Access Server, like maybe you would do when you deploy Access Server at home just for one or two people, then the user permissions page lets you create users and give them access to specific IP addresses or access to the internet or not. And basically just set up their users and their access rules right here. So you can just configure everything here in the web interface. And of course, there is a logging facility in the Access Server. It lets you look up logins from VPN clients, even failed logins, see how much data they've used, how long they've been connected for, and so on. There are also command line tools available to pull more information from the log database and export it in CSV or JSON format so that you can, for example, open it in Excel and sort and display that data in different ways. The Access Server has a lot more things that I could show you in screenshots, but the presentation would take a very long time if I go through all the possible screens. However, I do want to show briefly how a typical installation experience would be for a Windows client computer in just a few slides. This won't take long. So if you have a typical end user, you would head to the web address of the OpenVPN Access Server, and this address should be something that you, as an administrator of the Access server, configure and provide your users. For example, I could have it at the address myvpn.openvpn.net or test.johandraisma.nl or whatever domain I care to use and have control over. Technically, it can also be based purely on IP address, but that has some drawbacks if you ever need to move your server to another IP address. In any case, once I've landed on the login page as a user, I can enter my credentials and log on. And when I do that, immediately I will be presented with the option to download the OpenVPN Connect client software for any of the 5 supported platforms. The Windows and macOS software is actually bundled inside the Access server. So when you click that link, you immediately get a download. If you look at the bottom left, you'll see that OpenVPN Connect.msi has been downloaded to this computer. So I went ahead and clicked it. And if I open that installer, well, the installation starts, and it doesn't actually really ask you much of anything. It just installs and makes it ready for use. It immediately also prepares the installation just for you, so it has your username in it. So as we can see here, I've got the installation set up on Windows 10, and at the bottom right in the system tray, there will be an icon for OpenVPN Connect. And I can click that, and it will show a menu with some options. And in this particular case, I've set up a server on as.test.johandraisma.nl. So I can click that, and if I select Connect there, I'll be asked to enter my credentials. And once I do that, I start the connection, and the connection establishes within like 1 or 2 seconds at most. You'll see in the demo, this will come up as well. I just wanted to give you a quick preview of what that would look like in, on a typical Windows client. For macOS, we have a process that's pretty much similar, except the system tray icon is at the bottom on macOS. But the idea is the same. We offer a client software that you install, and you can use that to connect. On Android and on iOS, we actually have apps in the iOS and Google Play Store that you can use to install the OpenVPN Connect client. And it has the ability to import profiles directly from the Access server. You just provide the address of the Access server, the username, and the password, and the import procedure is complete. So we try to make it as simple as possible. For Linux, we currently have the open source community client. It's from the open source project directly, and it's available in a lot of repositories that come default with the Linux distribution that you choose. For example, if you have Linux Debian or you have Linux Ubuntu, you just use aptitude to download and install a package called OpenVPN. Then you go to the web interface of the Access server and download the connection profile. That's actually just a text file that contains everything you need, contains all the certificates and information to get the connection going. You save that on your Linux machine, you start the OpenVPN process with that configuration file, and a connection establishes. In the future, something that we're actually working on now, we'll have a new officially released client from the OpenVPN Incorporated company itself for Linux. And we hope to also have a GUI available in that. So it will be even easier to use OpenVPN on Linux. Well, that concludes my part of the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end of this presentation during the Q&A session.
Awesome,
All right,
Johan.
Greg.
I am here. Great job. Let's dive back into this now. We've got just at the top of the hour, we're just under, let's say 15 minutes. We got some really cool material to go through. FYI, we are receiving amazing questions. We have a ton of people in attendance, so we can't unmute the mics right now. So we'll try and get to them at the very end. If not, we will follow up with you individually. So really quickly, let's go through an overview of our product called JumpCloud's Directory as a Service. And again, I'll walk you through this so we can get to the meat, which is actually seeing the bits in operation. So when the team and I hypothesized this product roughly 6 years ago, we looked at the market and we decided that there was no real foundational version of identity that, quite honestly, was doing things like Active Directory or LDAP did for organizations. There were plenty of cloud-based identity services, more or less federation services, but no one that we felt was truly and truthfully taking on the chore of centralized directory-based management. What does that really mean? You're going to see. We think it is the aspect of true foundational sources of credentials and users surrounded by deep protocols, LDAP, Radius, SAML, and of course, mechanisms which are proprietary to bind computers, Mac, Windows, and Linux to this core directory service. When you look at this picture, this is sort of a representation, a very simple one. We call it the wheel diagram, generally displaying our world of, and how our directory is built. FYI, everything that we have built is of our own design and making, meaning this isn't like, let's call it an instantiation or a packaging of Active Directory and put it up in the cloud for you. This is our own proprietary directory architecture, utilizing open source standards, protocols, LDAP, Radius, and SAML in particular, as the mechanism, 3 of the mechanisms to authenticate and authorize. So let's kind of walk through this. The first is we are the owner of credentials and users in the organizations that use us. We do actually offer a bridging mechanism to Active Directory for those that need to maintain some connection to an AD domain controller, but in the majority of the thousands of customers that use us, we're it. We sit behind anonymously and securely behind resources, including G Suite, Office 365/Azure. We are the thing that actually owns and provisions those accounts in addition to the various other applications that surround us. We are the thing that is providing the multi-factor authentication mechanism to each of these resources as well. When you look at computer and server management, the area we call systems, this is where we get into a very deep, secure, proprietary mechanism of binding a free-floating machine, meaning a physical laptop like a MacBook, or a virtual server like an Ubuntu or CentOS server up in some cloud. We do it through the installation of a lightweight agent, and this agent is responsible for all of the user account provisioning, all of the account management, meaning password and SSH key transactions, the multi-factor authentication to get into those endpoints, Mac, Windows, or Windows soon in Linux, and a number of other very powerful features like GPO management. When we call it policy management, but it's cross-platform. You want to secure a machine and basically institute it with all of your baselines of security policies, use JumpCloud to do that. Just like you used to do with Active Directory and GPOs, we do this, but again, across platform. Also, all of the full disk encryption and key escrowing as well. That's all covered in the JumpCloud platform. When you start to go around the authentication one, let's say you have networks. So you got a user that, let's say, they have a MacBook, okay? Do you know JumpCloud's authenticating and managing that? That's cool, but what networks does this user need? Well, it could be a VPN, like we're discussing. It could be a wireless network or an Ethernet network. It doesn't matter. If those networks and those network devices, like a Cisco Meraki wireless access point, or again, the OpenVPN Access Server, if those technologies can speak strong protocols, in our case, Radius, or we're using Open LDAP under the covers, which you'll be seeing here in a second, then you can bind that resource to the central set of credentials, just like you could an actual instance of free Radius or Open LDAP. This is just us hosting it and virtualizing it in front of our directory. Again, the same thing applies to on-premise file servers and NASes. So let's say you have Synology or QNAP or Moro data, right? And that resource needs to be bound to the users that should access it. You don't want it to have its own local authentication. Bind it via LDAP, but using strong Samba authentication. You know, it's interesting about that statement. Anyone in the audience who's sophisticated knows Samba, not really a very strong protocol vis-a-vis security. What we did is made it solid and tunneled it and wrapped it through LDAP, but you still need Samba or SMB transactions in order to gain access to file servers. It's how they work still to this day when you buy an off-the-shelf Synology server, right? It's using Samba underneath the covers. We speak that language. Let's move further. Let's say you got the same user, but they need other forms of applications. You've got Salesforce up in the cloud, and you've got, let's say, Jira on-premise. How do you bind those things to the directory? Through protocols. Again, you're watching LDAP come back around again. You bind Jira to the directory, our directory, via our LDAP endpoint. But Salesforce, obviously, it doesn't support LDAP. It supports SAML. So use our SAML endpoint in order to bind and connect. So now I think you're really starting to see JumpCloud is a foundational directory that hungers for you to connect your resources through protocols. So why JumpCloud? Just very simply, it's cloud-based. You don't have to install anything on premise anymore. There are no servers. Number two, we're independent. While your customers have a choice, it's Active Directory, generally speaking, or JumpCloud as sort of these foundational things. I want to absolutely be clear. We love Microsoft. We love the Windows operating system. But what we are showing here is we're independent. We want you as an IT professional to have choice in the resources you would choose to buy for your users, but not have your directory force your hand in those decisions. That's why we love being truly independent. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, it really doesn't matter to us. That's why protocols exist, and that's why we instituted them in the cloud for you. And finally, endpoint centricity. Directories are directories, right? But computers are computers. We think that there is a very tight confluence between these things, and we are extremely dedicated to endpoint security, Mac, Windows, and Linux. We call it, the system is the gateway at the end of the day to accessing resources. It better be secure. So now let's get into the meat. Here's where we talk about OpenVPN and JumpCloud showing their strength in integration. And that's when you look at my wheel diagram, this is sort of the area of the product that we're really going to be focusing on, and you'll be seeing in the demonstration. We're going to today use LDAP as the demonstration sort of bed here. It could be Radius. I just wanted to show LDAP off because I can do some cool group membership stuff, and you can do it with Radius too, but it kind of presents well in LDAP. I just chose LDAP in order to do the demo, which you'll see in a second. I put this diagram together basically as just, your classic sort of box and line thing. This actually is how I've got mine set up. I've got my client. In fact, you'll see here in a minute, I'm actually doing this webinar from a Mac host, a MacBook, but I'm going to use Windows, like a Windows client. I have a virtual machine waiting in the background that you see here as part of the demo. So I've got my client. I've got OpenVPN Access Server set up in an Amazon cluster, on one of our Amazon clusters, just as a test bed. And then I've got JumpCloud also in the cloud, obviously. We are a SaaS platform. And you'll see there's no servers on-prem. I have the Access Server easily built up in a Linux instance, and it's just humming away. But we're using cloud-based technologies, secure cloud-based technologies to integrate. Now, how does all this transaction work? Basically, focus in on the middle part. You're going to see where I've taken Access Server. I have chosen not to use local authentication, but using LDAP. Again, it could be Radius. The yellow line emitting down from the Access Server into JumpCloud is the authentication request, the authent request. Once Access Server basically is programmed to say, where do I get my authentication from? Okay, an LDAP server, it knows to lob an LDAP search query in order to scan the LDAP tree inside of JumpCloud to find the user and do all the wonderful things. The green line going up is the authorization response, the auth-z response. So as you'll see, I'm going to do a bad response and then a good response, so you can see how all this stuff really operates behind the scene. And obviously, once the connection is made and secure, that client then can tunnel all the way through to get access to the stuff that that person really needs, be it a VPC up in Amazon or on-premise file servers, whatever it is, right? All the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Now, the last thing I want to really get across before we go into the demo is this. The teams, OpenVPN and JumpCloud, created awesome documentation. In fact, two of the authors are sitting here in the room, our Radius and LDAP experts. So if you go to support.jumpcloud.com, you will see, and just search for OpenVPN. That's all you need to type in our knowledge bases search engine. You will see those documents that you see here in the screenshot. It takes you step by step, and they're not really, truly not very long steps in order to build the integration. When we do the demo, I want to just lay the groundwork in advance, so you'll understand what we're going to do. We're gonna set up the JumpCloud LDAP directory. In fact, it's already set up. I'm going to show you a binding account. This is what you'll see inside of the Access Server dashboard. It's a classic bind in. Consider that the LDAP service account to basically make the handshake. And in that account in JumpCloud, we'll have the authority to scan the LDAP tree. We'll get a user group together, so we'll do the authorization aspect. But then you're going to see like how this all transacts with OpenVPN. It's all, you'll see this. It's very straightforward. So with that, what I'm going to do is my sleeves are quite literally already rolled up, and we're going to get busy showing the demonstration. All right. In order to do this, I have a number of different resources. Let me walk you through these resources to show the demonstration. The first, obviously, is the OpenVPN Access Server. I'm already logged in here. We'll take you through a quick tour. You can see that this is actually up in our Amazon server. It's just something it took us literally about under an hour to get all this fired up and tunneled through. We're all good with that. The second resource is the JumpCloud product. This is the administrative dashboard, what you as IT people will be accessing in order to build your users, build user groups, etc. And you'll be watching this live fire in a second. Two other resources, so you know what they are. Actually, three other. The first is I have two terminals. One is accessing, or when I log into it, will be accessing the belly, so to speak, of the OpenVPN Access Server. And the other terminal is actually accessing our LDAP endpoint. I have a LDAP search query here that is poised, ready to do a search in order to display for you, the various memberships and stuff. So I promised you this was going to get nerdy, and it will, and that's the way we like it. The third and final resource is over here. It's the Windows client. It's a virtual machine that's actually hosted on my MacBook, but it's a real Windows 10 machine, and we're going to use this as the client. Note here, this guy, Tim Albert, this is our fictitious pretend user we're going to be sort of demonstrating today, and we'll watch all of his transaction sort of go through the failed authentication attempt and then the good authentication attempt. All right, let's get dirty. So the very, very first thing we're going to do is jump into JumpCloud. Why? Because you got to see how the LDAP stuff is sort of set up. It's super easy. We're doing this first, so then you can, when we jump into OpenVPN Access Server, you get to see exactly how it integrates. Now let's take a look at that. We'll head over into our directories area. You'll notice we have integrations with a lot of other sources of identities, G Suite, Office 365, we've got Workday, we've got obviously a connection to an Active Directory. When you see JumpCloud LDAP, you will see that this is actually not an external directory. This is really just the management of our authentication endpoint. So this is actually, a virtualized LDAP interface that really is tightly integrated with the JumpCloud platform. You'll see in here, I've got a user group already built called OpenVPN, right? And I'll jump into that user group, but why do I say that? Because the OpenVPN group of users is really integral to the authorization process, right? Now, one last thing. I mentioned I have a BindDN. This guy is called LDAP user. You can see here, this is a service account. Its password never expires, which we have set. That is modifiable if you choose to. But in our case, it's just a headless, non-human service account. Now, where does this guy come into play? Notice here this LDAP distinguished name. So when JumpCloud builds its user account, if you're going to use this account for an LDAP transaction, we present all of the true LDAP information about the user. Now let's jump into OpenVPN and we'll show you. So here is the status overview. Whoops, my session timed out. Let me log in. Cool. So you can see this is just the general health and status of OpenVPN Access Server. Current users, there's nobody banging against. There's no tunnel going on right now. You're going to see that live in a second. Our Tim Albert will be going, he'll light up in here. But notice here, I have an ability to authenticate through Radius or LDAP. My LDAP, you'll see, is done just like this. It is mindlessly easy to set up. You'll simply click LDAP. The JumpCloud LDAP endpoint is called ldap.jumpcloud.com. You don't have to write the LDAP-S or anything in there because it's all taken care of right here through SSL. So flipped on. You don't have to actually input the 636 port. VPN Access Server does that for you. This is all the BindDN information. This is that service account. This is that service account's password. This is where the service account will search for users when it does its scan. Very, very easy. Access Server actually makes this easy too. It says if you're using LDAP, use UID, which I have input here. If you're using AD, use same account name, right? Very easy. Now, here's the critical thing, which is actually, again, super easy. If you're going to, and we always recommend this, use group management for authorization, you have the member of overlay. This is what that string looks like, right? And again, all of this is in the documentation that I showed you a few slides ago, right? So don't worry about trying to take screenshots or any of this kind of stuff. It's all in our docs, all right? So now let's get busy. We're gonna first go over into this particular Windows machine, all right? Now, if I'm going to sign in as Tim, just so you know, the password that I'm entering for Tim, this is his JumpCloud password because this particular Windows client is being managed by JumpCloud too, including the authentication, right?
Well,
So
I'm glad to see that the login worked because it would have been very embarrassing if it didn't.
Yeah, because we got JumpCloud, Johan.
Everything works with JumpCloud.
Yes. Well, again, not to be cheesy, but let's just say we've spent quite a few years getting this right. So now in the tray, you'll see here is the OpenVPN client. I'm going to just connect to this guy. I've already got my address. I'm going to continue. And I'm going to type in a password here, right? So this is a password, the same JumpCloud password. And this guy is going to fail, right? Boom. Disconnected. Authentication failed, right? So now I'm the user, like why the hell is this failing, right? Let's show you transactionally behind the scenes why that is occurring. So if I go into, first, let me log in, all right? I'm going to log in. Let me type in my password. This is the terminal session that's getting me into OpenVPN, all right? So I need to see why the heck isn't Tim Albert authenticating, right? So let's put in his username, tim.albert. All right. I'm going to type, let's say I know Tim's password. Okay. Okay, boom. Here is the great verbosity of what Access Server is doing. User not found that meets specified requirements. He's not a member of the OpenVPN users group, right? So that's why you set up group membership. And it's like, aha, okay. Now let's look at this inside of LDAP. Same thing. Here's JumpCloud now. So if I do a search query, and it's like, all right, here's all the users. Let's search for Tim Albert. Okay. Here's Tim Albert. Here's his LDAP record, and we can look at all his group membership. So he's a member of the admins group, Synology, DevOps, development, users group. Boom. I can see he's not a member of the OpenVPN group. Duh. So let's head back over into the JumpCloud user interface. I'm going to go into groups. I'm going to find that OpenVPN group. Here it is. All right. And now look at users, and oh man, there's no users bound. Let's find Tim. Here's all the people that with the search name Tim. Here's Tim Albert. I see. I need to add him to the group, which I'm doing here. I will save the group, and instantly we propagate that membership out into the universe. So let's go back to the machine. All right. Let's head back over into his connection. Let's reconnect to this guy. Now I'm going to enter my password again. Voila. Now I'm good. Now you can see I'm connected. Folks, that's it. I mean, if I've done my job right, this is sort of like even a non-impressive demo. And I mean that sarcastically, because it's all the technologies and protocols. When you do the protocols right underneath the covers, and that's a big point, not every LDAP endpoint is the same, I will promise you. What we've done is actually built the LDAP endpoint right. And what OpenVPN did is actually build open LDAP search queries right. They're doing the right thing. So this is how all this stuff works so seamlessly. So let me just say I am at the top of the hour, actually a little bit past. We're about 5 minutes past the hour. We have kept you 5 minutes longer than we had anticipated. And we want to ensure you that we see the questions, they will be answered. So we will be working collaboratively with the whole team at OpenVPN in order to make sure your questions are answered effectively and directly. So with that, Johan, if you have any closing comments, I want to personally thank you for taking the time in working with us. I think that all of the materials were excellent, and we just showed how simple this stuff is to use in an integrated fashion.
Yeah, great. I mean, the live demo was great and very clear, very technical as well in some areas. I think it was great. And yeah, JumpCloud is good. I like it.
Awesome. Well, listen, folks, we will let you get back to your days. We thank you for participating in another JumpCloud webinar, and so thankful for our guest today from OpenVPN. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to answering your questions.